The Rubaiyat of a Scotch Highball. This document is intended to strike somewhere between a temperance lecture and the bartender's guide. Relative to the latter, drink shall swell the theme and be set forth in abundance. Agreeably to the former, not an elbow shall be crooked. Bob Babbitt was off the stuff, which means, as you will discover by referring to the unabridged dictionary of Bohemia that he had cut out, the booze that he was on the water wagon. The reason for Bob's sudden attitude of hostility toward the demon room as the white. Ribboner's Miscall Whiskey, see the bartender's guide, should be of interest to reformers and saloon keepers. There's always hope for a man who, when sober, will not concede or acknowledge that he was ever drunk. But when a man will say in the apt words of the phrase distiller, I had a beautiful skate on last night, you will have to put stuff in his coffee as well as pray for him. One evening on his way home, Babbitt dropped in at the Broadway bar that he liked best. Always there were 3 or 4 fellows there from the downtown offices whom he knew. And then there would be highballs and stories, and he would hurry home to dinner a little late, but feeling good and a little sorry for the poor Standard Oil Company. On this evening, as he entered, he heard someone say, Babbitt was in last night, as full as a boiled owl. Babbitt walked to the bar and saw in the mirror that his face was as white as chalk. For the first time, he had looked truth in the eyes. Others had lied to him, he had dissembled with himself. He was a drunkard and had not known it. What he had fondly imagined was a pleasant exhilaration had been maudlin intoxication. His fancied wit had been drivel, his gay humors, nothing but the noisy vagaries of a sot. But never again. A glass of seltzer, he said to the bartender. A little silence fell upon the group of his cronies who had been expecting him to join them. Going off the stuff, Bob? One of them asked politely and with more formality than the highballs ever called forth. Yes, said Babbitt. Someone of the group took up the unwashed thread of a story he had been telling the bartender, shoved over a dime and a nickel change from the quarter, ungarnished with his customary smile, and Babbitt walked out. Now, Babbitt had a home and a wife, but that is another story. And I will tell you that story, which will show you a better habit and a worse story than you could find in the man who invented the phrase. It began away up in Sullivan County, where so many rivers and so much trouble begins or begin. How would you say that? It was July, and Jessie was a summer boarder at the Mountain Squint Hotel. And Bob, who was just out of college, saw her one day, and they were married in September. That's the tabloid novel-owned swallow of water, and it's gone. But those July days. Let the exclamation point expound it, for I shall not. For particulars, you might read up on Romeo and Juliet and Abraham Lincoln's thrilling sonnet about you can fool some of the people, etc., and Darwin's works. But one thing I must tell you about. Both of them were mad over Omar's. Rubaiyat. They knew every verse of the old bluffer by heart, not consecutively, but picking them out here and there as you fork the mushrooms in a 50-cent steak a la Bordelaise. Sullivan County is full of rocks and trees, and Jessie used to sit on them, and please be goodest to sit on the rocks, and Bob had a way of standing behind her, with his hands over her shoulders, holding her hands, and his face close to hers, and they would repeat over and over their favorite verses of the old tent maker. They saw only the poetry and philosophy of the lines, then indeed they agreed that the wine was only an image, and that what was meant to be celebrated was some divinity, or maybe love, or life. However, at that time, neither of them had tasted the stuff. That goes with a 60-cent table d'hote. Where was I? Oh, they married and came to New York. Bob showed his college diploma and accepted a position filling inkstands in a lawyer's office at $15 a week. At the end of 2 years, he had worked up to $50 and gotten his first taste of Bohemia, the kind that won't stand, the borax and formaldehyde tests. They had 2 furnished rooms and a little kitchen. To Jess, accustomed to the mild but beautiful savor of a country town, the dreggy Bohemia, with sugar and spice. She hung fish scenes on the walls of her rooms and bought a rakish-looking sideboard and learned to play the banjo. Twice or thrice a week they dined at French or Italian table d'hote, in a cloud of smoke and brag and unshorn hair. Jess learned to drink a cocktail in order to get the cherry. At home, she smoked a cigarette. After dinner, she learned to pronounce Chianti and leave her olive. Stones for the waiter to pick up. Once she essayed to say la 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 in a crowd, but got only as far as the second one. They met one or two couples while dining out and became friendly with them. The sideboard was stocked with scotch and rye and a liqueur. They had their new friends into dinner and all were laughing at nothing by 1A. Bah. Some plastering fell in the room below them, for which Bob had to pay $4.50. Thus they footed it merrily on the ragged frontiers of the country that has no boundary lines or government. And soon Bob fell in with his cronies and learned to keep his foot on the little rail 6 inches above the floor for an hour or so every afternoon before he went home. Drink always rubbed him the right way, and he would reach his rooms as jolly as a sandboy. Jessie would meet him at the door, and generally they would dance some insane kind of a rigadoon about the floor by way of greeting. Once when Bob's feet became confused and he tumbled headlong over a footstool, Jessie laughed so heartily and long that he had to throw all the couch pillows at her to make her hush. In such wise life was speeding for them on the day when Bob Babbitt first felt the power that the giftie guide him. But let us get back to our lamb and mint sauce. When Bob got home that evening, he found Jessie in a long apron cutting up a lobster for the Newburg. Usually when Bob came in mellow from his hour at the bar, his welcome was hilarious, though somewhat tinctured with Scotch smoke, by screams and snatches of song and certain audible testimonials of domestic felicity was his advent proclaimed. When she heard his foot on the stairs, the old maid in the hall room always stuffed cotton into her ears. At first, Jessie had shrunk from the rudeness in favor of these spiritual greetings, but as the fog of the false bohemia gradually encompassed her, she came to accept them as love's true and proper greeting. Bob came in without a word, smiled, kissed her neatly but noiselessly, took up a paper and sat down. In the hall room, the old maid held her, two plugs of cotton poised, filled with anxiety. Jessie dropped lobster and knife and ran to him with frightened eyes. What's the matter, Bob? Are you ill? Not at all, dear. Then what's the matter with you? Nothing. Hearken, brethren. When she who has a right to ask interrogates you concerning a change she finds in your mood, answer her thus. Tell her that you, in a sudden rage, have murdered your grandmother. Tell her that you have robbed orphans and that remorse has stricken you. Tell her your fortune is swept away, that you are beset by enemies, by bunions, by any kind of malevolent fate, but do not, if peace and happiness are worth as much as a grain of mustard seed to you, do not. Answer her nothing. Jessie went back to the lobster in silence. She cast looks of darkest suspicion at Bob. He had never acted that way before. When dinner was on the table, she set out the bottle of scotch and the glasses. Bob declined. Tell you the truth, Jess, he said. I've cut out the drink. Help yourself, of course. If you don't mind, I'll try some of the seltzer. Straight. You've stopped drinking, she said, looking at him steadily and unsmilingly. What for? It wasn't doing me any good, said Bob. Don't you approve of the idea? Jessie raised her eyebrows and one shoulder slightly. Entirely, she said with a sculptured smile. I could not conscientiously advise anyone to drink or smoke or whistle on Sunday. The meal was finished almost in silence. Bob tried to make talk, but his efforts lacked the stimulus of previous evenings. He felt miserable, and once or twice his eye wandered toward the bottle, but each time the scathing words of his bibulous friend sounded in his ear, and his mouth set with determination. Jessie felt the change deeply. The essence of their lives seemed to have departed suddenly. The restless fever, the false gaiety, the unnatural excitement of the shoddy bohemia in which they had lived had dropped away in the space of the popping of a cork. She stole curious and forlorn glances at the dejected Bob, who bore the guilty look of, "Et, least a wife-beater or a family tyrant. After dinner, the colored maid who came in daily to perform such chores cleared away the things. Jessie, with an unreadable countenance, brought back the bottle of scotch and the glasses and a bowl of cracked ice and set them on the table. "May I ask," she said, with some of the ice in her tones, "whether I am to be included in your sudden spasm of goodness? If not, I'll make one. For myself. It's rather chilly this evening for some reason." "Oh, come now, Jess," said Bob good-naturedly. "Don't be too rough on me. Help yourself, by all means. There's no danger of your overdoing it. But I thought there was with me, and that's why I quit. Have yours. And then let's get out the banjo and try over that new quick step." "I've heard," said Jessie in the tones of the oracle, "that drinking alone is a pernicious habit. No, I don't think I feel like playing this evening. If we are going to reform, we may as well abandon the evil habit of banjo playing, too." She took up a book and sat in her little willow rocker on the other side of the table. Neither of them spoke for half an hour. And then Bob laid down his paper and got up with a strange, absent look on his face and went behind her chair and reached over her shoulders, taking her hands in his and laid his face close to hers. In a moment, to Jessie, the walls of the Saint-Hung room vanished, and she saw the Sullivan County hills and rills. Bob felt her hands quiver in his as he began the verse from old Omar. "Come, fill the cup, and in the fire of spring the winter garment of repentance fling. The bird of time has but a little way to fly, and lo, the bird is on the wing." And then he walked to the table and poured a stiff drink of scotch into a glass. But in that moment, a mountain breeze had somehow found its way in and blown away the mist of the false Bohemia. Jessie leaped, and with one fierce sweep of her hand sent the bottle and glasses crashing to the floor. The same motion of her arm carried it around Bob's neck, where it met its mate and fastened tight. Oh my God, Bobby, note that verse I see now. I wasn't always such a fool, was I? The other one, boy, the one that says, "Remold it to the heart's desire." Say that one to the heart's desire. "I know that one," said Bob. It goes, "Ah, love, could you and I with him conspire to grasp this sorry scheme of things entire? Would not we?" "Let me finish it," said Jessie. "Oh, would not we shatter it to bits and then remold it nearer to the heart's desire?" "It's shattered, all right," said Bob, crunching some glass under his heel. In some dungeon below the accurate ear of Mrs. Pickens, the landlady, located the smash. "It's that wild Mr. Babbitt coming home soused again," she said. "And he's got such a nice little wife, too." The pendulum. "81st Street, let him out, please," yelled the shepherd in blue. A flock of citizen sheep scrambled out, and another flock scrambled aboard. Ding, ding! The cattle cars of the Manhattan Elevated rattled away, and John Perkins drifted down the stairway of the station with the released flock. John walked slowly toward his flat. Slowly, because in the lexicon of his daily life there was no such word as perhaps. There are no surprises awaiting a man who has been married 2 years and lives in a flat. As he walked, John Perkins prophesied to himself with gloomy and downtrodden cynicism the foregone conclusions of the monotonous day. Katie would meet him at the door with a kiss flavored with cold cream and butterscotch. He would remove his coat, sit upon a macadamized lounge, and read in the evening paper of Russians and Japs slaughtered by the deadly linotype. For dinner, there would be pot roast, a salad, flavored with a dressing warranted not to crack or injure the leather, stewed rhubarb, and the bottle of strawberry marmalade blushing at the certificate of chemical purity on its label. After dinner, Katie would show him the new patch in her crazy quilt that the Iceman had cut for her off the end of his four in hand. At 7:30, they would spread newspapers over the furniture to catch the pieces of plastering that fell when the fat man in the flat overhead began to take his physical culture exercises. Exactly at 8, Hickey and Mooney of the vaudeville team, unbooked in the flat across the hall, would yield to the gentle influence of delirium tremens and begin to overturn chairs, under the delusion that Hammerstein was pursuing them with a $500 a week contract. Then the gent at the window across the air shaft would get out his flute. The nightly gas leak would steal. Forth to frolic in the highways, the dumbwaiter would slip off its trolley. The janitor would drive Mrs. Sonovitsky's 5 children once more across the Yalu, the lady with the champagne shoes in the sky. Terrier would trip downstairs and paste her Thursday name over her bell. And letterbox and the evening routine of the Frogmore Flats would be underway. John Perkins knew these things would happen, and he knew that at a 8:15 he would summon his nerve and reach for his hat, and that his wife would deliver this speech in a querulous tone. "Now, where are you going, I'd like to know, John Perkins?" "Thought I'd drop up to McCloskey's," he would answer, "and play a game or two of pool with the fellows." Of late such had been John Perkins's habit. At 10 or 11 he would return. Sometimes Katie would be asleep, sometimes waiting up, ready to melt in the crucible of her ire a little more gold plating from the wrought steel chains of matrimony. For these things Cupid will have to answer when he stands at the bar of justice with his victims from the Frogmore Flats. Tonight, John Perkins encountered a tremendous upheaval of the commonplace when he reached his door. No, Katie was there with her affectionate, confectionate kiss. The 3 rooms seemed in portentous disorder, all about layer things in confusion, shoes in the middle of the floor, curling tongs, hair bows, kimonos, powder box, jumbled together on dresser and chairs. This was not Katie's way. With a sinking heart, John saw the comb with a curling cloud of her brown hair among its teeth. Some unusual hurry and perturbation must have possessed her, for she always carefully placed these combings in the little blue vase on the mantel to be someday formed into the coveted feminine rat. Hanging conspicuously to the gas jet by a string was a folded paper. John seized it. It was a note from his wife running thus: "Dear John, I just had a telegram saying Mother is very sick. I am going to take the 4:30 train. Brother Sam is going to meet me at the depot there. There is cold mutton in the icebox. I hope it isn't her." Quincy again. "Pay the milkman 50 cents. She had it bad last spring. Don't forget to write to the company about the gas meter. And you're good. Socks are in the top drawer. I will write tomorrow. Hastily, Katie." Never during their 2 years of matrimony had he and Katie been separated for a night. John read the note over and over in a dumbfounded way. Here was a break in a routine that had never varied, and it left him dazed. There on the back of a chair hung, pathetically empty and formless, the red wrapper with black dots that she always wore while getting the meals. Her weekday clothes had been tossed here and there in her haste. A little paper bag of her favorite butterscotch lay with its string yet unwound. A daily paper sprawled on the floor, gaping rectangularly where a railroad timetable had been clipped from it. Everything in the room spoke of a loss, of an essence gone, of its soul, and life departed. John Perkins stood among the dead remains with a queer feeling of desolation in his heart. He began to set the rooms tidy as well as he could. When he touched her clothes, a thrill of something like terror went through him. He had never thought what existence would be without Katie. She had become so thoroughly annealed into his life that she was like the air he breathed, necessary but scarcely noticed. Now, without warning, she was gone, vanished, as completely absent as if she had never existed. Of course, it would be only for a few days, or at most a week or two, but it seemed to him as if the very hand of death had pointed a finger at his secure and uneventful home. John dragged the cold mutton from the icebox, made coffee, and sat down to a lonely meal face to face with the strawberry marmalade's shameless certificate of purity. Bright among withdrawn blessings now appeared to him the ghosts of pot roasts and the salad with tan polish dressing. His home was dismantled. A quinzied mother-in-law had knocked his Larry's and penates sky high. After his solitary meal, John sat at a front window. He did not care to smoke. Outside, the city roared to him to come join in its dance of folly and pleasure. The night was his. He might go forth unquestioned and thrum the strings of jollity as free as any gay bachelor there. He might carouse and wander and have his fling until dawn if he liked, and there would be no wrathful Katie waiting for him, bearing the chalice that held the dregs of his joy. He might play pool at McCloskey's with his roistering friends until Aurora dimmed the electric bulbs if he chose. The hymeneal strings that had curbed him, always when the Frogmore flats had palled upon him, were loosened. Katie was gone. John Perkins was not accustomed to analyzing his emotions, but as he sat in his Katie-bereft 10x12 parlor, he hit unerringly upon the keynote of his discomfort. He knew now that Katie was necessary to his happiness, his feeling for her, lulled into unconsciousness by the dull round of domesticity, had been sharply stirred by the loss of her presence. Has it not been dinned into us by proverb and sermon and fable that we never prize the music till the sweet-voiced bird has flown her in other no less florid and true utterances? I'm a double-dyed dub, mused John Perkins, the way I've been, treating Katie. Off every night, playing pool and bumming with the boys. Instead of staying home with her, the poor girl here all alone with nothing to amuse her, and me acting that way. John Perkins, you're the worst kind of a shine. I'm going to make it up for the little girl. I'll take her out and let her see some amusement. And I'll cut out the McCloskey gang right from this minute. Yes, there was the city roaring outside for John Perkins to come dance in the train of Momus. And at McCloskey's, the boys were knocking the balls idly into the pockets against the hour for the nightly game. But no primrose way nor clicking cue could woo the remorseful soul of Perkins the bereft. The thing that was his lightly held and half scorned had been taken away from him, and he wanted it. Backward to a certain man named Adam, whom the cherubim bounced from the orchard, could Perkins, the remorseful, trace his descent. Near the right hand of John Perkins stood a chair. On the back of it stood Katie's blue shirtwaist. It still retained something of her contour. Midway of the sleeves were fine individual wrinkles made by the movements of her arms in working for his comfort and pleasure. A delicate but impelling odor of bluebells came from it. John took it and looked long and soberly at the unresponsive grenadine. Katie had never been unresponsive. Tears, yes, tears came into John Perkins's eyes. When she came back, things would be different. He would make up for all his neglect. What was life without her? The door opened. Katie walked in carrying a little hand satchel. John stared at her stupidly. My, I'm glad to get back, said Katie. Ma wasn't sick to amount to anything. Sam was at the depot and said she just had a little spell and got all right soon after they telegraphed. So I took the next train. Back. I'm just dying for a cup of coffee. Nobody heard the click and rattle of the cogwheels as the third floor, front of the Frogmore flats, buzzed its machinery back into the order of things. A band slipped, a spring was touched, the gear was adjusted, and the wheels revolve in their old orbit. John Perkins looked at the clock. It was 8:15. He reached for his hat and walked to the door. Now, where are you going, I'd like to know, John Perkins? Asked Katie in a querulous tone. Thought I'd drop up to McCloskey's, said John, and play a game or two of pool with the fellows.